was a winter night, and the snowstorm was devastating. I, a young pizza delivery driver, was tasked with making a delivery in a neighborhood that seemed more isolated than usual. The biting wind blew against my face as I drove, and visibility was nearly non-existent among the swirling snowflakes. The car radio tried to lighten the mood, but I found myself increasingly nervous at the thought of confronting the solitude of a house amid the storm. When I finally arrived at the house, the atmosphere felt dark, as if it were hiding deep secrets. It was an old, worn-down structure, and the lights were on, casting a yellow glow that seemed inviting. But there was something unsettling about it. As I got out of the car, my intuition began to scream at me, but the need to complete my job and earn a tip drove me forward. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered. The hostess had an intense gaze and an expression that made her seem strange. With a shy greeting, she approached the door, and before I could speak, I gathered my strength not to let anxiety show my nervousness. She seemed obsessively controlling about the pizza. After making the delivery, I noticed that she didn't seem so interested in the food, but rather in the conversation that would follow. The feeling that the house held something and that I was out of my comfort zone began to intensify. As I entered, I noticed more about what surrounded the hostess. The walls were adorned with numerous portraits, and the intensity of each image made me feel a growing discomfort. They were not just pictures. They were faces of smiling people, but with an aura of mystery that filled the atmosphere of the house. At first, I thought they were friends or family, but I slowly realized that some of them had labels beneath their photos, dated with what appeared to be days of disappearance. My stomach twisted viscerally, and the tension became palpable. "These are my friends," the woman said, her voice a mix of pride and pain. The healthy conversation that should have occurred was now cloaked in a mantle of uncertainty. The way she presented them was obsessive, and I couldn't shake the thought that something was very wrong. Each attentive gaze toward the dark images and the charged climate of the room made me desperately wish to leave, but the location and the conditions of the snowstorm kept me trapped. As I tried to keep the conversation light, her questions began to revolve around my own life. Where did I live? How many deliveries did I make per night? If there was a chance I would want to stay and chat a little longer. The air felt heavy with unsettling desperation, and I, in a protective impulse, tried to incorporate a friendly facade into my expression. However, the only thing I really wanted was to get out and return to my car, away from that oppressive house. As minutes turned into hours, I felt the walls closing in, and the idea that I could become just another photo on those walls became alarming. The hostess continued to show me more portraits, recounting the story of each person in them. Some had disappeared years ago, others more recently. The way she spoke seemed more like devotion than lament, and with each pause, the image of a new person became increasingly uncomfortable. With renewed determination, I decided that I could not let fear dominate me. "I need to go. The snowstorm is worsening out there," I said, in a tone of voice firmer than I felt. She, however, did not seem willing to let me go so easily. Her expression changed, revealing an intensity that, as I became aware of it, was concerning. A disguised smile carried something more sinister, and as the tension settled in, my body began to tense, suggesting that I prepare for what could happen next. Then, like a moment of consciousness, I realized that the exit door was locked. The secrets of that isolated house and the stories it held seemed to surround me. The worry about the situation grew, and as I realized it was just me and the woman there, the feeling of isolation escalated. The snowstorm howled outside, making reality feel even darker and more claustrophobic. With the door locked, a wave of panic began to take hold of me. The feeling of being trapped inside that house, surrounded by portraits of missing people and under the obsessive gaze of the hostess, made the situation increasingly unbearable. A terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if I were the next on the list? What did she really want with me? The woman didn't seem concerned about the storm, almost as if the intensity of the weather were irrelevant. She watched me with a fixed attention, as if evaluating every response I gave. The atmosphere was heavy, and the need to escape grew more urgent. "You don't need to worry," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll be safe here. Everyone I know is always here. They don't go anywhere." Feeling adrenaline pumping through my veins, I sought a way to detach myself from that situation. My mind raced as I looked around for something I could use, a way to open the door or distract her. Her obsession with those faces revealed a connection that was not seen in normal people, and I realized I had to act before my situation became even more critical. The room was filled with unusual items: boxes of old photographs, dust-covered furniture, and in the corner, an old scrapbook lying on the floor. A flicker of an idea sparked in my mind. "Can I see the scrapbook?" I asked, trying to draw her attention away from the door. She hesitated, but a spark of excitement lit up her face. "Of course, you'll love the stories. Each person here has something special." Her tone seemed contagious, and as she moved toward the scrapbook, I seized the opportunity to slowly move toward the door. While she spoke about the portraits that were being lovingly kept, I attentively looked at the doorknob. With her back turned to me, I realized it was my chance. I grasped the doorknob and turned it gently, but the door didn't budge. Desperation began to swell, and my throat tightened. Evidently, the lock was jammed from the inside. I needed more time. "Here it is," she said, holding the scrapbook and turning to show me the pages. That passionate look made me momentarily freeze, but my mind was at work. I shifted my approach, trying to hide my unease. "What fascinating people. How did you remember all these stories?" I asked, attempting to spark a conversation while nervously glancing at the entrance. The woman began to tell me about each of the faces and their lives, and for a brief moment, I saw her as someone who truly believed in the stories she was telling. Then, an unexpected movement outside the window caught my attention. A figure in the snowstorm. My instinct screamed, and for a moment, I thought someone had come to help me. Hope and adrenaline clashed as the woman continued to speak, now in a frenzy. "Look," I said, pointing outside to distract her even further. She quickly turned toward the window, and as soon as I did this, I seized the moment to move toward the door again. The adrenaline, now at a peak, made my heart race. I tried the doorknob once more, this time with more force. The door was still locked, but the certainty that I needed to get out was more powerful than ever. And with one last push, I managed to fling the door open with a shocking bang. Ran out into the snow, the storm hitting me like a blast of icy air. The wind howled in my ears as I moved away from the house, hearing the woman scream behind me. Panic guided me as I ran without looking back, knowing I couldn't allow myself to be captured again. The sound of her voice echoed behind me, but urgency pushed me forward as the snowflakes enveloped me in a cold embrace. With every step, the snowstorm grew more intense, but the adrenaline kept me focused. I ran toward the road, and after a few torturous minutes, I finally spotted the glow of headlights approaching. Relief washed over me at the sight of the headlights drawing near, as if that light were breaking through the darkness of the storm and saving me from that nightmare. With one last push, I raised my hand and waved frantically, desperate for help. The car stopped, and the driver, a confused-looking man, quickly got out, concerned for my state. "What happened?" he asked, his gaze shifting between compassion and worry. The woman in the house. She's not normal. There are portraits of missing people." I managed to stammer, trying to explain amid my desperation and rapid breathing. I didn't want to believe that any remnant or shadow of the obsessive woman was still chasing me, but I felt that the experience had left marks on my being. The driver seemed hesitant, but soon took on a determined expression. "Get in. Let's get out of here." I thanked him and immediately climbed into the car, the warmth inside contrasting with the relentless cold of the storm outside. As he sped down the road, I looked out the window, hoping not to see the figure of the woman approaching. The storm seemed to be easing slightly, but the weight of the night still lingered with me, a reminder of what I had almost left behind. As we began to move away from the house, a sense of relief started to wash over me, but it wasn't enough to dissipate the images that still haunted my mind. During the ride, I recounted to the driver what had happened, sharing details about the photos and the woman's obsession. He listened attentively, his expression darkening as the story unfolded. "I've heard stories about that house," he finally said, his voice grave. "There are rumors that people have gone missing in that area. Some say the woman was once part of a family linked to all those disappearances." The terror settled in my stomach once more, and a chill ran down my spine. What was that house? Some kind of prison, a place where memories could not rest. The impact of the experience hit me like a wave, and the idea that I had barely escaped made me relive the terror. "The town needs to know," I said, determination firming in my voice. "We cannot let this continue. These people deserve to be remembered." The driver nodded in agreement, and as we moved further away from the snowstorm, I began to feel that life had granted me a second chance. I couldn't ignore the need to share the story of the house and the souls I had encountered. Soon we reached the town, the fog of the snowstorm finally dissipating. The warmth of the establishments and the glow of the streets reminded me of the safety we all seek, but the memories of the house would forever be etched into my being. Once in town, I got out of the car and made my way to the community center where a group of people was gathered. As I shared my story with them, I saw the expressions of concern and horror transform into a commitment to action. People listened intently as I spoke about the woman and the photographs, and the determination in their voices surged as we decided to investigate the disappearances. We were no longer just a group interested in scary stories. We were now in search of justice. With the morning light finally breaking through, the snowstorm continued its dance, but inside me, there was a new purpose. The struggle was not against the external storm, but against the shadows of memories we wished to forget. I could not stop until the truth was revealed, and those who had been forgotten received the recognition they deserved. The house that once terrified me was now becoming another page to be turned in the decor of the past, a story that deserved to be told. What had once been a simple pizza delivery had transformed into something much larger. And instead of just being a delivery driver, I had become the voice of many who needed to be heard. It was not just about escaping the snowstorm. It was about bringing light to what had remained in the shadows for far too long. From that day forward, I would be committed to illuminating the path, not only for those who had disappeared, but for all who needed justice and remembrance. It was a cold winter night, and I was alone in the workshop's garage, testing the engine of a truck I had just repaired. The fluorescent lights flickered slowly, creating dancing shadows on the walls while the wind howled outside. The atmosphere was heavy, with the feeling that the night was longer than usual. With few tasks to complete, boredom began to take over, but I was determined to finish my work before heading home. As I adjusted some tools, a sudden sound began to stand out among the noise of the engine and the howling wind. Hammering. It was a rhythmic sound, almost methodical, coming from a part of the garage that should have been empty. It seemed like someone was working there, but I knew there was no one else besides me, or so I thought. The pounding echoed through the cold structure, and a chill ran down my spine. I decided to ignore the fear growing inside me and went to investigate. I walked toward the more isolated part of the garage, where there was an old, weathered door that I always kept locked. The sense of curiosity and nervousness increased as I approached. With each step, the sound grew louder, and I could feel my heart pounding faster in my chest. Upon reaching the door, I reached for the doorknob and, to my surprise, realized it was locked. The hammering continued, now insistent, almost as if something wanted to get out. "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice sounded a bit louder than I intended, and the response was an unsettling silence. I looked around to see if there was anything that could give me a clue as to what was happening. The garage was filled with trucks and tools, but nothing explained the pounding that now echoed in my mind. With the door locked, the instinct to flee began to grow, but a surge of courage made me stay. "Is anyone in there? What are you doing?" I shouted again, but there was still no reply. The tension in the atmosphere escalated, and the feeling that I was not alone in the workshop weighed on me. With a renewed determination, I decided to search for the keys that were always hung in a conveniently accessible place. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I looked for the key that could open the door. As soon as I found it, I pulled it slowly, and as I turned it with a characteristic creak, the anticipation intensified. With a loud snap, the door finally opened, revealing a dark and dusty space. What I saw upon entering shocked me. The room was filled with stacked boxes and forgotten objects, but it was once again not empty. In the back, within the shadows, a man stood out, focused on a painting on the wall. He didn't seem to notice my presence immediately, and the atmosphere was laden with a strange tension. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man turned slowly and faced me, inviting a growing discomfort. His expression was enigmatic, a mix of serenity and a hint of something that felt like a challenge. He didn't respond, but continued to stare, as if absorbing the essence of the environment. Then, slowly, the man stepped away from the wall and began to approach. The hammering I had heard before was now much clearer, not coming from his hammer, but from something behind him, something hidden in the shadows. A sense of dread washed over me, and I realized he was cloaked in dust and paint remnants, as if he had lost himself in a distant project. The sound continued, now louder and more insistent, echoing with the urgency of a warning. With every step he took toward me, a survival instinct urged me to back away. "I don't want any trouble. What's going on here?" My voice trembled as I tried to maintain control of the situation. The man halted, and something in his expression changed. There was a gleam in his eyes that was not normal, and the intensity of the situation began to reveal itself in a new, unsettling dimension. Suddenly, he raised a hand and pointed to a dark corner of the garage, where a box was piled with blankets. "They need help," he said in a deep whisper. My heart raced in my chest, and my intuition screamed for me to back away. The mix of fear and curiosity kept me paralyzed in place, even though inside me there was a growing turmoil. What did he mean by they? As he pointed to the dark box, the idea that something or someone might be hidden there began to torment me. With my courage wavering, I hesitated for a moment, but the need to know the truth outweighed my doubt. Slowly, I approached the box while the sounds of hammering and whispers became relentless, echoing in a way that made no sense. The man continued to watch me closely, his penetrating gaze like a knife. What was hiding in that box? I didn't know what to expect, and at the same time, I felt I had to know. While I got closer, my heart felt like a drum in my chest. My eyes landed on the edges of the box, an old structure made of weathered wood. Whatever was inside seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were waiting for me to decide to open it. With a hesitant motion, I reached for the edges and pulled at the lid. The resistance was a reflection of what was hiding inside. When I opened it, what I found was not what I expected. There was nothing there that seemed threatening, but a collection of objects, personal items, photographs, and letters, piled up and covered in dust. As I examined the contents, I realized that these were the memories of people who had disappeared in the area. Faces I recognized from the news, stories I had heard in the town's corridors. A chill ran down my spine as I understood that there was not just a simple mechanic, but someone involved with these dark memories. "Help them," the man whispered again, sensing my recognition this time. "They need to be remembered. Their names need to be heard." The words echoed within me like a call. The connection became intense, and the weight of untold stories crashed against my consciousness. I perceived that the haze of guilt and lament had become an intrinsic part of that room. It was a plea for me to serve as a spokesperson, a messenger for those who were lost among the shadows. In the face of that truth, a new sense of determination blossomed within me. The whispers that had once seemed threatening now sounded like pleas for memory to be preserved, as if they were waiting for the light of recognition to finally set them free. The man had always been watchful, and the seriousness in his gaze had shifted with this revelation. He knew I could be the key to bringing those stories to life again. I sensed that I could not stay there any longer. The weight of the shadows was accumulating as time passed. I needed to shed light on what I had discovered. With renewed boldness, I looked at the man and said, "I will tell their names. I promise." His expression, once closed, now revealed a look of hope, as if he finally found someone willing to keep them in memory. As the shadows of the night continued to dance around us, a feeling of freedom began to rise to the surface. I carefully packed the letters and photographs, determined to bring the truth to the outside world. The wind outside still howled, but there was a new purpose forming within me. With each step I took toward the exit door, I knew the journey was just beginning. I was no longer just a delivery driver or a mechanic. I had become a guardian of the stories, a bearer of truths that needed to be remembered. As I exited the garage, the snowstorm felt less oppressive. With a renewed spirit, I would bring a new light and voice to those forced to live in the shadows. And looking at the road ahead of me, I realized that darkness could never stop me. The protection and memory must prevail, and thus a new journey would begin, where stories would be revealed and never forgotten. It was a cold and silent night, one of those winter nights when the snow fell gently, covering everything with a soft and shimmering layer. I, a barista at a small cafe, was finishing my shift, watching the streetlights reflect off the snowflakes while soft music played in the background. The atmosphere was cozy, and the smell of fresh coffee still lingered in the air, but gradually I began to feel that something was a bit off. My attention was drawn to the outside of the shop, where the snow was being trampled in a strange way. Oddly, the marks in the snow seemed to follow no normal pattern of footsteps. Instead, there were erratic traces, as if someone had been moving in circles or struggling to keep their balance. I felt intrigued and somewhat apprehensive. The irregularity in the snow did not resemble what typically occurred during snowstorms. It left me with a growing sense of discomfort. Curious and a bit nervous, I decided to approach the window to investigate. As I got closer, a different chill began to invade the atmosphere, and a shiver ran down my spine. When I pressed my face against the glass, I saw something that left me paralyzed. There were not just marks on the ground. There were handprints and fogged faces on the window, as if someone had been trying to get in and had pressed their face against the glass. Panic seized me, and I stepped back, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My heart raced, and questions began to flood my mind. What was out there? What had happened to that person? Deep down, a part of me wanted to open the door and investigate, but another part screamed for me to stay away. The atmosphere that had once felt inviting was now charged with palpable tension. An inability to act made me feel weak, and for a moment I considered calling someone, but the call would take too long. Then, I decided to grab the flashlight that was underneath the counter and cautiously made my way to the door that led outside the shop. With my heart racing and my breath quickening, I slowly opened the door and let the beam of the flashlight illuminate the night. The cold wind instantly cut against my face, and the sensation that something was about to happen caught in my throat. The marks in the snow seemed to intensify, almost like dark invitations to approach the mysteries in the shadows. Slowly, I examined the area around me. The lights of the cafe were on, but as I looked outside, all I saw were distorted shapes moving among the snow-covered trees. At this moment, there was no doubt left that strange things were occurring outside that shop. The sound of the wind howled like a distant lament, and every shadow that moved left me uneasy. I didn't know if they were merely trees or if something darker was lurking. With a sudden impulse, I approached the protruding window and examined the marks more closely. It was undeniable that someone had been there, and as I observed the formation of the marks, I realized they appeared to be made by hands in desperation. The dread intensified, and a scream surged through my body, so deep that it felt like an echo in the night. Without a clear explanation, I decided that I would not turn back. The curiosity outweighed the biting fear that threatened to paralyze me. With each step, the snow crackled beneath my feet, and when I reached the spot where the hands were pressed, I looked up toward the cafe. Looking at the window, the anticipation in my mind pulsed. I was trying to get in. What had happened to that person? The sense of urgency began to intensify, and the need to uncover the truth about the presence that had been left behind became almost an obsession. Then, as I prepared to head toward the next window, a shadow moved swiftly between the trees, and an instant chill overtook my body. It felt as if something was watching me, and in an impulse, I looked back at the cafe door. There was something about the way the light from the room reflected on the snow that quickly made me feel vulnerable. The thought of I should go back invaded my mind, but the attraction to the truth and the adrenaline overpowered the fear, and taking a deep breath, I was determined to face the unknown. Like a moth drawn to the light, I slowly advanced toward the next window, the snow crunching beneath my feet with each movement. The shadows danced in my view, making everything incomprehensibly darker. With every step, the feeling of someone lurking intensified, and I knew I couldn't turn back now. Reaching the window, the flashlight illuminated the fog glass, creating a surface that made it hard to see what was outside without being misled by the reflection. However, something caught my attention: the silhouette of a tall, slender figure moving between the trunks of the trees. My heart raced as adrenaline coursed through my body, and I forced myself to focus. What was that? A lost traveler? A spirit? Or something much more sinister? Then, without warning, the figure stopped and turned toward me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The penetrating and empty gaze of that silhouette revealed an expression of desperation and fear. It was as if that presence were desperately trapped in the snow accumulating around it, losing itself in the limbo between life and death. The figure seemed to writhe under the weight of an urge, and the feeling that I should help it increased. But along with that, something inside me screamed for me to flee. It was in that instant that I realized it was not just an impression that the figure wanted to be saved. It was an explicit plea. The whispers that had once been enigmas now transformed into a clear cry for help, as if they had been strengthened by the intensity of the storm. I tried to gather the courage to open the door and approach, but my body felt like stone, incapable of taking any action. Finally, I shouted, "Who are you? What do you need?" The figure hesitated for a moment, and to my surprise, began to move toward the sound of my voice. A shadow took form, and with each step taken, the whispers grew louder. "Help me," murmured a faint voice, nearly inaudible above the wind, but now strong enough for me to hear it. With that appeal, a wave of compassion washed over me. I couldn't just stand there, watching the lost figure without doing anything. With renewed determination, I forced myself to open the cafe door, not knowing what I was about to face. The biting cold hit me like an electric shock as I stepped outside, but my new mission to help had overcome the fear that had once dominated me. The silhouette was now clearer, revealing a young woman, her eyes reflecting desperation and loneliness. With my heart racing, I asked, "What happened to you? How did you get lost here in the snow?" The young woman looked around, and her distant gaze suggested she was not only physically lost, but also trapped among memories and pain. She began to speak, her voice choked by a lament that cut through the darkness around us. I was here, and I never let me go." Her words evoked a sense of understanding. I knew it was not just solitude that was trapped in the snow, but the sorrow of the stories of those who had disappeared in that region. Whispers of lost people echoed in my mind, and I realized that, somehow, I needed to help her find her way back. Aware of the danger of staying there any longer, I pulled out my cell phone and called the police, quickly explaining the situation. As I spoke, the young woman remained still, with a deep look that mixed hope and despair. Before I hung up, she tilted her head, looking again at the spot where the shadows seemed to dance among the trees. "If you don't tell, they won't know," she said in a whisper that was almost inaudible. The words seemed to resonate in devotion to the truth, and I felt that the task of conveying her story and that of other souls also needed to be fulfilled. With the call made, the young woman looked into my eyes, and in that moment of connection, she began to dissipate, as if preparing to leave. The wind blew stronger, and the young woman started to fade, her form becoming increasingly ethereal, as if she were getting ready to return to what she was, an echo among the shadows. The feeling of despair overwhelmed me. I couldn't let her go without giving her a chance to be remembered. "Wait!" I shouted, reaching out in an attempt to hold her, but only the cold air filled my grasp. "Tell your stories," she whispered softly, but as her voice echoed, her form began to disappear into the storm that surrounded her. There was a weight in her words, a calling for me to become a herald of the truths that remained hidden in silence. Each passing second became desperate, and as her body dissolved in the snow, I realized the emotional connection between us was stronger than I had imagined. The memories of other people who had also disappeared struck me like an avalanche. The photos I had seen in the woman's house before, the faces that smiled sadly, and now here I was, the spokesperson for their stories, about to be a link between the forgotten past and the truth that needed to be heard. I heard the whispers again, more intense, signaling that it was time to act. "I will tell. I promise I won't forget," I shouted, looking around as she slowly faded away. The wind continued to howl, but I could no longer hesitate. I fixed my gaze on the faces that had been etched in my mind, and an uncontrollable force took over me. With a burning determination, I knew that the only way to free them was to give voice to their stories, not just for the young woman, but for all those who had been forgotten. Finally, as the last part of the young woman dissolved into the mist of the wind, I looked again through the window of the cafe. I took that moment of peace to record everything I had experienced in a notebook I kept for notes. I described the young woman, the marks in the snow, and what I believed were the voices crying for help. The desire to breathe life into those souls filled every word I wrote. With the paper now filled with words, I looked outside one last time. The sky was beginning to brighten, and the snowstorm finally seemed to be yielding, revealing how light could be a release amid those shadows. It was a reminder that even in the darkest nights, there are paths to truth and illumination, if only we have the courage to seek them. Before leaving, I promised myself that I would share those stories. I would use social media and local communities to convey the message, ensuring that the stories would be heard and celebrated. That experience had transformed me into a storyteller, and instead of just having a pizza delivery, I now had a mission. With a lighter heart and determination, I left the cafe, deciding that the next opportunity to tell the stories of those who had departed would not be just an obligation, but an act of love. What I had experienced transcended mere curiosity. Now, it was a legacy of which I had become the guardian. As the morning unfolded, I realized that the snowstorm that had brought fear and uncertainty also brought the chance for transformation. The cold could be relentless, but I knew that within each lost story lay a unique warmth, a love, a human connection that should remain alive in all of us. And as I began to walk down the road, what had once seemed like a terrifying night was now just the beginning of a new journey, full of hope and new challenges. With that determination etched in my soul, I was ready to make the truth my beacon, guiding the lives of all those who had been erased in the snow and bringing light where there had once been darkness.